Hey guys, welcome back. This is part 2 of Hitler's Lightning War, and in this second half of the video, we're now going to look at some big invasions that Hitler's going to try to pull off, and also some big problems that we're going to put in his path, and that will help explain why he will later fall from power. As a quick review, in our last video, we talked about Hitler's strategy of lightning war, using fast airplanes and tanks to break through enemy lines. We looked at how the Allies rescued almost 400,000 Allied soldiers from the coast of France at a place called Dunkirk. We looked at Hitler's bombing of British cities called the Blitz, and that was part of the Battle of Britain, where Hitler attempted but failed to destroy the British Air Force, which would allow him to invade Britain. So Britain was the one country that so far has been able to defend against a German attack and succeed. Now, in our second video, second half of the video anyways, we're going to move on and look at what's going on in North Africa. So we call this a world war for a reason. It's not just because Japan's running crazy on the other side of the world, which we'll talk about in another video. It's also because the war expands to places like Africa. So let's get into the topic. This cartoon is really, I think, so telling in that, if you recall, in the early 30s, Hitler was learning a lot from Mussolini, the original fascist dictator of Europe. But by 1941, the roles have reversed, and Hitler is the dominant fascist leader, and Mussolini is learning and trying, grudgingly, I guess, learning from Hitler. All right, let's get into some other areas of this war. So this is going to require to remember back to last semester, but there's this really important waterway right here. It's a man-made waterway, canal in other words, that connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. It was a British possession, and we know that the Allies want to protect it from Axis attacks. And I'm talking about the Suez Canal. So if you've forgotten the Suez Canal, guys, there it is. Very, very important waterway. And that's going to be the focus of a lot of the North African campaign. So in September of 1940, the Italians, feeling kind of left behind by Hitler's success, decide to get a success of their own, and they invade Egypt, which was British controlled at the time. Their goal is to get all the way to the Suez Canal, but the Italians basically fall apart. I mean, even though the Italians outnumber the British, they fail in their attack, and then they're chased back out of Egypt, and the Italian army just begins to fall apart. Okay, the Italians are surrendering in droves. So to reinforce his ally, the Italians, Hitler has to send down some extra soldiers, some German soldiers, and the unit he sends down becomes known as the Afrika Korps, and was led by one of Germany's most decorated generals, Erwin Rommel. And he was known as the Desert Fox because he was so clever, and he was able to launch these attacks and then just kind of disappear like a fox would. So this battle is going to go kind of back and forth. It's a seesaw battle taking place between 1941 and 42. Because this is very much a secondary front in the war, neither side is able to send enough soldiers there to decisively defeat the other side. So it's a back and forth type battle that we will not resolve until 1943. So we'll come back and revisit North Africa later. All right, well, let's get into now really the high point of Hitler's power and also his biggest mistake, and that's going to involve the Soviet Union in 1941. We're going to refer to this as the Eastern Front. Now recall, we've learned this in an earlier unit, Hitler said that the German people were this master race called the Aryans, and because of that, they deserved more lebensraum, which means living space, right? And that's going to motivate his attack on the Soviet Union. So Hitler's attack on the Soviet Union is known as Operation Barbarossa. And for Hitler, this attack was really the ultimate fulfillment of everything he wanted to do with Nazi Germany. Everything else had really been just a sideshow up until this point. This is why he had taken over Germany to begin with. And that there are two goals with this attack on the Soviet Union. One, destroy communism. Right? There's only one communist country in the world at this time, the Soviet Union. If he could defeat them, in theory, he would wipe communism out. Because remember, fascists and communists hate each other. But equally important is by taking over the Soviet Union, this would give Hitler just enormous amounts of lebensraum, or living space. So in theory, all the Russian people who live out here would be kicked out or sadly murdered, and the Germans would come in, they would basically settle this area, and Germany would just expand eastward. It would give Nazi Germany breathing room, lebensraum. Hitler is extremely confident that this attack will go well. He famously said, "You only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." And, he's not wrong in the sense that the Soviet Union certainly looked like a vulnerable country. And Stalin is getting warning signs, but he's ignoring them that this attack will happen. He's convinced that Hitler won't break their Nazi-Soviet pact, this 10-year non-aggression pact. But on June 22nd, 1941, Hitler and his Axis buddies invade the Soviet Union. It's the biggest invasion in all of human history. Some 3 million Axis soldiers are going to attack the Soviet Union. Again, most of these are German soldiers, but you also have Italians and Romanians and Hungarians and various others. Hitler has stabbed Stalin in the back, right? That non-aggression pact, we're done. Now, at first, what Hitler predicted seems to be happening. The Soviet army is poorly equipped, poorly led, poor morale. It is just absolutely disintegrating. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers are rounded up quickly. Thousands of Soviet aircraft are destroyed, most of them still on the ground. This initial invasion could not have gone better for Hitler. Now think back to last semester. We learned that when Napoleon had invaded with his grand army in 1812, the Russians had to respond by using a pretty drastic tactic. It was called Scorched Earth Policy. Right? Basically, you destroy anything of value as you retreat to deny it to the enemy. So after that first couple months, that shock kind of wears off and the Soviets begin to retreat, but also to stiffen their resistance. And as they retreat, anything of value that the Nazis would need or want, you destroy it, and you booby trap it, and you put landmines behind, and anything to slow down the Germans and weaken them as they invade. Here's a poster urging Soviet people to rise up and again destroy anything of value that the fascists might want. Although I got to say, I don't think this is probably very safe. I don't think that would work out very well for this guy. The Soviet people rise up. They call themselves partisans. They're basically guerrilla fighters. And Hitler had issued an order that any suspected partisan that's captured would be executed on the spot. So if you're not wearing a military uniform and you're armed or even suspected of being a partisan or helping them out, you will be executed. No trial, no prisoner of war camp. You'll just be killed on the spot. Now, just to show you how desperate the Soviets were to attack and to resist the Nazis as they invaded, famously, the Soviets even turned to dog bombs. Okay, and the dogs were trained to climb under tanks, and so they'd run under the German tank, and that they would detonate, knocking out the tank. All right, so by September 1941, we're a couple months into the attack now. German forces have reached Leningrad, which is a new name for St. Petersburg, that city built by Peter the Great way back when. And this was one of the major focus points of the German attack into the Soviet Union. By taking St. Petersburg, you would greatly weaken the Soviet Union. Now, the Germans have cut the city off, but the city is well defended, and so launching just a frontal assault on Leningrad would be too costly, so the Germans lay siege. Remember, siege is where you surround an enemy, you cut off all the food supplies, medicine supplies, everything that they need to survive on, and you basically just try to starve them out. The Germans are bombing the city by air and also shelling it with their artillery, and Leningrad becomes just an absolute nightmare. And its 2.5 million residents are very quickly reduced to eating whatever they can find. Cats, dogs, rats, anything and everything. And in that first winter of this siege, nearly 1 million people perished. Okay, nearly 1 million. Now, to put that in some perspective, that's basically, if you took all the losses America is going to suffer in this war and you doubled it, that will be the number of people who died in Leningrad in one winter, right? One season, one city, twice as many people died there than all American forces in World War II. So this becomes just a city that is a graveyard. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be in Leningrad in this time. Now, to preview something from a little later in the war, I'll tell you this, that the German siege fails, okay? The Soviets are able to hold out for 872 days. And after that, finally, the Germans are forced to retreat, and the city is relieved, and more supplies sent in. But that's 2.5 years, almost 3 years, that they were cut off, basically, and just unbelievable sacrifice. This mass grave of just some of the dead who died at Leningrad. Now, if Hitler wants to take out the Soviet Union, of course, he's got to take more than just Leningrad. He's got to take Moscow, the capital city. And by December of 1941, he is basically right there. I mean, the German forces are like in the suburbs of Moscow. I mean, they can see the big city on the horizon. They are so close that Hitler can taste it. But Hitler's forces have advanced hundreds of miles. Their supply lines are stretched. The Scorched Earth Policy the Russians are using has been very effective. The Germans are cold and exhausted. And this is the perfect time to attack the Germans. The Soviets come to the conclusion. So Soviet General Zhukov is going to counterattack the Germans. They launch a massive attack with whatever they can throw together. The Germans, who are exhausted and incredibly cold because they're not prepared for the Russian winter, are hit hard, and they begin to retreat. And so Hitler has really reached his high point, and now things are going to start turning against him. This is going to save Moscow and ultimately doom Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union. Now, remember, this is December of 1941. The war itself doesn't end until May of 1945, so we have a long way to go. But it's already clear that Hitler probably is not going to be able to win the Soviet Union. He's gone just one step too far. All right, now what really important country in the world have we not yet mentioned much about in this unit? And the answer is us, literally. United States, right? America. We're trying to stay neutral. Right? We are neutral, but of course we want one side win other than the other, and we want the Allies to win, of course. We want the British to survive. And so in March of 1941, our country, even though we're neutral, passes a new law called Lend-Lease. And what this means is our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, can lend or lease weapons to any country we see as vital to our interests. Okay, so if it's an important country to us, we can give them stuff. Franklin Roosevelt famously compared this Lend-Lease phenomenon to letting a neighbor borrow a hose to put out the fire. In other words, imagine your neighbor's house goes up in flames and he rushes over to your house and says, "Can I borrow a hose? I've got to put the fire out at my house." You don't negotiate, you just give him the hose because you don't want that fire to spread to your house, right? And so we're going to give, the hose in this case is weapons we're going to give to the Allies. And these Allies are not just, Britain. I mean, we're giving, you can see all around the world, we're giving stuff to the Soviet Union. Even Stalin, a horrible human being, is going to get stuff because he is our friend in this war against the Nazis. This doesn't mark the official end of our neutrality, but in all ways, really it does, because our factories are being geared up for all-out war production. We're only supplying stuff to one side other than the other, and we're even escorting some of this stuff across the ocean, so we're delivering it, right to Britain. And you can see just how generous we were to these various countries. Now, on August 9th, 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt meets with his British counterpart, Winston Churchill, off the coast of Newfoundland, which is up in Canada, and they come up with this thing called the Atlantic Charter. And the Atlantic Charter is this agreement that basically is the vision of these two men for what the world should look like after the war is over, to make a better world. And in particular, the one I want to draw your attention to is this call for a permanent system of general security. Well, what the heck does that mean, right? Well, what that is a reference to replacing the League of Nations with something that actually works. And so this is our first real look at what's going to become the United Nations, which is still with us today. Now, if we're shipping our stuff over to Britain, and this is stuff that's going to be used against Nazi Germany, we know that there's a danger here, right? Nazi Germany might decide to sink those ships. And so Americans find themselves in harm's way, even though we're not technically in this war. On Halloween 1941, a U.S. warship called the Reuben James was sunk by a U-boat, killing over 100 sailors. And we find ourselves basically in an undeclared naval war with Hitler. And so everyone's convinced that if we go to war in World War II, it'll be because of Germany. Kind of like World War I, right? Well, not so much, as we're going to find out in our next video. All right, so we have put Hitler basically at the peak of his power with his invasion of the Soviet Union, and we've already placed some obstacles in his way to sort of preview how he's going to fall. And in the rest of this video, we're going to focus on things that's going to lead towards Allied victory. So the days of Hitler being able to just attack as he sees fit, that is basically over. All right, that's it for this video, guys. In our next one, we'll move on and continue looking at the war. We're also going to get into Japan and see what's going on over there in the Pacific.